To Arizona now, the Pima County Sheriff's Department tells CBS News DNA recovered from gloves found near Nancy Guthrie's home do not match any profiles in the FBI's national database. Investigators found those gloves 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. They do look like the pair seen on the suspect in the doorbell camera video the night that Nancy was taken. In the meantime, investigators are using this device called a signal sniffer to try and detect transmissions from Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker. That device is mounted on a low-flying helicopter. We want to bring in David Kennedy, a former NSA hacker, the inventor of the Pacemaker signal detector. David, this is really impressive. I think this has caught so many people's attention and captured their imagination because a lot of people didn't even know that this was possible. I know you're working with law enforcement to deploy this service in the search. Tell us a little bit quickly about your background and why you came up with this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. As soon as I saw the notes from law enforcement that Nancy had a pacemaker that disconnected from her phone, that would be using a newer technology that has been implemented in most pacemakers today, which is Bluetooth connectivity to your phone. And Bluetooth operates the same way as normal wireless technology that you have in your home. And so, I started looking at, is it possible, to track these types of devices? And we know that law enforcement has her phone, and with that, you can get the physical address of the actual pacemaker itself. Lots of folks have pacemakers. There's a lot of wireless technology out there. So how can you reduce the noise while also capturing these devices? And these devices typically only transmit between 10 to 15 feet. So we have to figure out a way that could amplify that signal to get a much further signal. And so I started experimenting with signal amplifiers, high decibel gain antennas. I mounted it onto a drone. And I was able to get over 800 feet of detection radius with that just on a specific Bluetooth low energy device. And so, I shared that research with law enforcement. I also believe they have another type of technology too through Bluefly that can really home in on the signal itself once that initial signal has been sent. So with amplification, with the ability to deploy things like drones or leveraging helicopters, they should be able to cover a lot larger area than really home in just from a few meters to the actual signal itself and locate where she's at.
Yeah, so you mentioned being able to cut through the noise. I think that's what a lot of people wonder. Like, aren't pacemakers very common? And it sounds like you have the ability to do that, to hone in. So it sounds to me like the big limitation here is the radius, right? You have to, it sounds like, have a sort of reasonable area or a reasonable belief that someone would be in a specific area. Is that the way that you view the limitations of this technology? And what are the other constraints?
That's a great question. So, I actually used AI to formulate what was the probability of success when looking for Nancy Guthrie within a 120-mile radius, which is a very large radius. Mm-hmm. If you had around 50 to 60 drones, these drones, especially the commercial grade, can run, anywhere between 50 to 70 minutes, and then, integrated with these types of technologies to sniff for this type of device, getting upwards of, let's say, 300 feet to 800 feet. You can really cut that time down pretty substantially across the board. You're probably talking, a day or a few days or a few, maximum of 2 weeks of being able to cover a 120-mile radius to be able to actually identify it. It really comes down to, manpower, drone operators, the drone technology itself. So being able to augment what's called a payload onto these drones to be able to deploy them. And it's my understanding that this is a relatively new capability for law enforcement. So they don't really have the tools and technology to do this right now. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get that up and running, but it's not very hard to do. With commercial off-the-shelf things that I had literally in my basement, I was able to solder some things together and deploy this and get 800 feet of radius on a commercial, a non-commercial drone. Basically, you go to Best Buy and buy it, mount this on there, and fly it around. They should be able to do this pretty quickly.
Yeah, I could see this being used in similar searches, obviously, for other people who are missing. If there was an area that you would hope to improve upon, what would that be? And what would the next step be in advancing technology like this so it can be used more widely or more effectively?
Yeah, the folks at the FBI and law enforcement, they look at technology as an asset. Everything from cell phone communications, ad tracking, what our devices do, working with, partnerships with Google and Apple to be able to retrieve data. This is another toolkit in their arsenal. And, expanding on that technology, being able to look at wearable devices, like Fitbits, Garmin watches, things like that. This is also leveraging the same type of technology. Same thing for AirTags, by the way, use Bluetooth low energy, very similar to the pacemakers. So this really opens up a whole new avenue of collection to be able to understand and locate people that may have gone missing or that may be, kidnapped in certain situations. I think, this case itself, one, it being so high profile, and two, the conditions of what has happened, they're really trying to spin up this capability as fast as possible to really try to locate Nancy as fast as possible. And then we'll use that in future cases, and if something like this happens again.
Yeah, I know so many people are hoping for Nancy's safe return. I also know there are probably families all over who are watching this case who have missing loved ones, who are looking for any sign of hope for themselves and their families. David Kennedy, thank you for taking the time to explain this to us. I certainly wish you and everybody luck who is in the pursuit of getting Nancy home. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And if you have any information on the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, call 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Office. The number is right there on your screen.